Please join me in welcoming Mark Bennett, our District Attorney, Jeff Easter, our Sedgwick County Sheriff, and Jim Howell, our Sedgwick County Commissioner. Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. I think the reason we were asked to be here today is in that meeting that Mr. Todd's referring to. The question was posed whether or not our criminal justice system is broken at this point, and my retort to that, whenever I'm asked that question, is no, it's not broken at all. It's functioning exactly the way we intend it to function, given the amount of resources we put into it and the places we put those resources. If we want it to function differently, then we need to change things. But to suggest that it's broken is to suggest somehow that it is spun out of control and it has taken on a life of its own. No, it's working the way we set it up to work. And by we, I mean everybody in this room and everybody who's come before us. Does it need to be fixed? Yes, it does. There are things that need to be addressed, but I don't think that. I think we risk setting aside ownership and our own responsibility for this if we just say it's broken and as if something's somehow out of our control. So quickly, a quick history of one of the things that I think began and put us where we are today. One of the first events was in '63. John Kennedy passed what at the time was called the Community Mental Health Act. The idea was when people were mentally ill, up until that point, if what most communities across the United States had done was to put them in larger institutions. Think of Belleville and these larger places, usually away from metropolitan areas. In Kansas, we had followed suit. We had Larned, which is a lovely campus, but it is, you take a hard left after you go 3 hours west of here and, or excuse me, hard right, I guess, up by Great Bend. It's way out there. Osawatomie, same thing. These were sort of isolated campuses away from the larger areas, and that's where we sent people. Kennedy's vision was that we would do better for these folks if we would bring them back to their local communities, put community mental health facilities in place, fully fund those, and make them operational so that people could get the help they needed closer to home, maybe be able to stay in their own homes, keep their jobs, that sort of thing. Good idea. The issue, like most types of legislation, was their sustainability. What they found is over time, about half the centers got built, and over time they were not fully funded. They were built, but the operational expenses to keep them going were not in place. The last of the money, the last of the effort in that regard, wrapped up during the Reagan administration. He gave block grants to try to keep these things operational. And I think that we could all agree that it's not been a rousing success. I think in the United States, the three largest mental health facilities in the continental United States are Rikers Island, Cook County Jail in Chicago, and the Los Angeles County Jail, which tonight will hold about 20,000 people will spend the night in the Los Angeles County Jail. And that's how it works every single night, which is about twice, by the way, the number of people we have in our entire prison system in Kansas. So it tells you how big that place is. I put Sedgwick County Jail down here at the bottom of that slide because Jeff, when he stands up here in a moment, Sheriff Easter will talk about the impact that mental health has on his operations in the jail. And I don't think there's anybody that could honestly disagree that the Sedgwick County Jail is the largest mental health facility in Sedgwick County. Now, if we don't want it to be that way, fine. But it's not broken. That's the system we live with because that's the system that we collectively set up. In 1990, in the state of Kansas, there were 1,000 mental health hospital beds across the state of Kansas. Today, or as of 2017, there were 258. In 2017, 39% of the people who are in the Kansas Department of Corrections, so the penitentiary system, I'm going to make a distinction here when I say KDOC or penitentiary, that is distinct from jails. Jail is not, sometimes people are in jail and that term gets tossed around as if they're synonymous. They are not. Prisons are state pen, the state penitentiary El Dorado, Hutch, Lansing, Stockton, Ellsworth, Norton, and then Topeka for women. Jails are going to be the county jail in any given jurisdiction. But in 2017, 39% of the inmates, this is according to the Department of Corrections and the Sentencing Commission's annual report, nearly 40% of the people, 4 out of 10 going in or spending the night in the prison setting have mental illness. And of those, 11% have what they describe as persistently mentally ill. That's a problem. And I would say that, and Jeff can weigh in here momentarily, but he'll tell you that roughly on any given night it may change here or there, and any given month ebbs and flows, but roughly the same percentage are going to be found in the jails as well. In 1993, we had passed the Sentencing Guidelines Act in Kansas. If any of you have any even passing familiarity with the justice system in Kansas, you know that we operate in the felony level off of what's called a grid. The severity level of your crime goes up from a 10 all the way to a 1. Off grids, something outside of the grid. I'm talking about first-degree murder, capital murder, child sex crimes, Jessica's Law crimes. Everything else is going to be on a grid, and the grid is set up by the severity level of the crime, lowest to highest. And then the grid also works its way over. I guess as I'm looking at you, it works its way this direction, excuse me. And it's based upon lowest criminal history working its way up to the highest level of criminal history. The idea behind the sentencing guidelines was many reasons we passed it. Among them was this notion of truth in sentencing. People were tired of somebody getting a 3 to 10 under the old pre-guidelines system, and then what does that mean exactly? If I'm a victim of a crime, how long will he be in? And there was a lot of indeterminate, they call it indeterminate sentencing. So they wanted truth in sentencing. So our grid has a specific number on it. If you were convicted of a, let's say, aggravated burglary, actually that's a level 4 now, so it's aggravated burglary or aggravated battery. Those are both called level 4s, and on the no criminal history, if you have no history at all and never done anything before, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 41 to 43, 49 months, I believe it is. And you will get a specific term, 43 months. And so the most you can get out early is you have to serve at least, you can get 20% good time, 15% on higher level crimes. And the idea was when someone is sentenced, the public ought to be able to know this is exactly how much time the guy's going to do. This is the term he's going to do. Truth in sentencing. That was the notion behind it. I will also point out that when that bill went into law in 1993, we had 3 special rules. I think the first one was if you were convicted while you were already on paper for another probation or you're on parole when you commit a new felony, that should be a special. You should be treated differently than somebody who's not been in trouble before. Today we have over 40 special rules. So our fairly clean system that was put into place in 93 has been, I mean, I was asked one time to put a one-page thing together just talking about sex crimes. Before I became the district attorney, I'd been in the sex crimes unit in Sedgwick County for about 12 years. And I was asked to put together a training, just give us a one-page synopsis of the stuff just the bare minimum that you have to know to be a practitioner in sex crimes prosecution. And I got it down just the bare minimum, just the nut that you have to understand it. It was 5 pages. It's very, very complicated. By the way, as of March of this year, as of the last 30 days, our prison system in Kansas is at 101% capacity. We are full. We are over full. Stats. I'm not big on stats, but I think some of these are fairly illustrative of what's going on in Kansas. In 2018, only 30.9% of the people in prison were admitted solely for the basis of a new crime, nothing else. The rest were there for any number of things, but including violations of their supervision, violations of probation, violations of parole, violations of post-release. 40%, of the top 4 reasons for violations for people for why are you being sent up, why did you violate? Top 4 reasons are 1, absconding. They take off and don't come back. Drug usage, we call hot UAs. They take a urinalysis test and they test positive. 3, they fail at drug treatment, put them in treatment and they fail. And the 4th is they go out and commit a new crime. I would suggest to you that absconding is driven by drugs. People don't not show up because they've got something better to do. They don't show up because they know they're going to be positive. So I would say of the top 4, the top 3 are directly related to drugs. 40% are there for violent crimes. 15% are there for drug crimes. I would also point out that there's this notion that our prisons are full of low-level marijuana users who have been caught. The prison is full of teenage kids with a joint in their pocket. That's crap. That is not true. That's not to say that I want marijuana to be legalized or not legalized. I'm pretty agnostic about that. But what I do like is facts, not policy based upon misinformation. In 2018, 91 people in the entire state of Kansas were convicted of felony marijuana charges, and 6 went to the penitentiary. We have 10,000 people in the pen right now. 6 is not the problem. 70% arrived at the prison setting owing less than 5 years. Of those, 21% of people went to the penitentiary owing 6 months or less. What's the point? I mean, I'm not suggesting we should lock them up even longer, but my point is, why are we bothering to send somebody to prison for 6 months? Whatever good we were trying to accomplish, if our system has failed because we can't get them off of the drugs and keep them straight and out of trouble, to send them up for 6 months, okay, they're going to come back better trained, less likely to use drugs, less likely to commit crime? I don't think so. The justice system right now is a revolving door. Violations of supervision lead to low-term, short-term stays over and over again. Drug addiction and mental health issues permeate our system. We have a fourth of the beds we had 30 years ago for mental health, and we have very poor access to treatment. If anybody in this room has a job, and your spouse has a job, and you have a 19-year-old son or daughter who gets into drugs, you have options. You can use your private pay insurance and you can try to get them into treatment. I would suggest to you that if you go looking for treatment, you will find some nice treatment providers who are doing their level best here, but in terms of an inpatient treatment facility, maybe they need 30 days to go in and really dry out. Good luck finding it. Am I suggesting that it's the government's job to create these things? No, but I am very unequivocally suggesting this. We are spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $28,000 per year per person in the pen. We are spending our money right now on this problem. The choice is, how do we want to spend it? If you want to continue to spend 28 grand a year, we'll continue to do exactly what we do. Jeff's people will lock them up, I'll prosecute them, we'll put them in either the penitentiary or the jail, and we'll at some point have to build a new jail or a new pen. Well, my suggestion is, if we would put some money back into the community for drug and alcohol treatment and make it more accessible, I'll show you here momentarily before I wrap up and turn my time over to Jeff and to Jim, that you will see a return on investment, but we get no return if there is no investment. Somebody likes me. There you go. What do we have today? What do we do? So we have tried, and here's another thing. We need to try criminal justice reform, and this is another thing that we have done a very poor job of articulating. We have been doing this in Kansas for a very long time. Criminal justice reform, we have done a poor job of articulating that, but to suggest that we are behind the times and have not kept pace with criminal justice reform, I would challenge anybody nationally to find a state that has gone to the lengths that we have to try to encourage reform. We date back to 2001, Senate Bill 123. We gave drug treatment money to people to try to get them into treatment. The problem is, to qualify, you have to be convicted of a felony. Well, okay, I mean, I get that, and I certainly don't, want to throw any shade at the DOC for that. They have a finite amount of resources, and they're not going to waste it on people. They're going to use it. They're going to use it on the ones who need it the most, the convicted felons. But we tried that, and we are continuing to do it. That money has been spent for the last 19 years. It has not stemmed the tide. Senate Bill 323 makes it harder to revoke people on probation. Well, one of the things you could glean from my presentation thus far is, well, we are too ticky-tacky about sending people up for violations. We should quit doing that. Oh, no. 323, been in place now for years, since 2008, I want to say. Makes it harder to revoke people for probation. House Bill 2170 was passed, I think, 5 years ago. If you want to go to the penitentiary with a drug, if you get charged with possession of methamphetamine, and you are charged and convicted with felony weight possession of methamphetamine, and you are not a convicted felon with a ton of criminal history, if you find yourself in the penitentiary, I'm trying not to be sarcastic or crass here, but you will have had to have tried damned hard to get there, because you have time after time after time built-in hoops that we have to jump through to get you to the point that you could go to the penitentiary. You must fail once, twice, 3 times at least before a judge can even legally send you up. So to suggest that it's just that we're too quick to pull the trigger on all these people who are violating their probation, that's ignoring all of the reform efforts in the past. I'm not, again, angry about that. I'm just pointing out we have tried reform, and we are still today 101% capacity in our prisons. We have got to find a new way. Invest in alternatives. What are my examples? Instead of just standing here being mad, do I have anything to offer? Yes. Go to my office, go to the county courthouse, go to see Jeff or I, and go just north of the courthouse. Don't go north, it's a one-way street going south, so you have to come in from Murdoch. But before you get to the courthouse, look to your right. There's ComCare. And the ComCare facility has started several years ago a crisis center, community crisis center, But they take people off the streets, so the sheriff, the police department, they arrest a guy who's saying the Lord's Prayer in his underwear at 3 in the morning or whatever. And I'm trying to, keep this light, but not violent. He's not shooting a gun. He's not stabbing anybody. He's not, tearing up, throwing bricks through windows. He's doing something that tells you, okay, he needs help. What have we done with him historically? Take him to St. Joe and get him admitted. Meanwhile, the cop sits there while the clinician comes down and evaluates. Hours are spent, overtime is paid, and the system does not work. By the way, that cop, while he's doing that, is not out protecting anyone else. Instead, we have a crisis center now, and we opened it up hoping we could save about $1 million a year in the community if we would open this. 3 to 5 beds, sobering beds. You know what they are? Lazy boys. Lay them down there. Let them get their powder dry for a few hours, dry up, clean up, sober up. Let a caseworker come in and hook up with them and get them out the door and hopefully back onto a path to success. The Hugo School of Public Policy at Wichita State has done a study now. 16, 17, and 18, 15, 16, 17, the 18 study is pending, and they have found that by having just that there, it has saved the South Central region and the state $8.1 million annually. They're not going to the ERs. They're not taking up overtime for the cops. They're not taking up EMS and I mean, just all of the systems components that do this. Miami-Dade County, it's not part of my slide, but Miami-Dade County did a study a few years ago, actually last year I believe, of high utilizers of resources. People who are in and out of the ERs over time and time and time again, go to the mental health facility time and time and time again, end up in the jail over and over again. 97 individual people, 97 cost Miami-Dade County $17 million. You could pay somebody $50,000 a year to just say, I want you to follow him. Just follow him around all day long. I'll pay you $50,000 a year to be his personal escort and keep him out of trouble. And it would be less expensive than paying $17 million. It's nuts. 8.1, oh, and by the way, and I talked to Joan Tammany, the director of ComCare, and I said, where are we at this year? We got our report back. She says, no, but the Hugo School of Public Policy is saying this last year we went from 8.1 million, we're pushing north of 12 million this year in savings just by having the crisis center. So my point is, we have an example of something that works. Kansas City has one too, by the way, and they're seeing the same type of return on investment. So we can go on spending $25,000 a year per person to keep them locked up in a cage, most of whom are, not most of whom, but a large percentage of whom are addicts and mentally ill. People who are addicts are not going to be good probationers and do well on supervision, whether that supervision is diversion, probation, post-release, parole, whatever, or in the joint while they're in doing time. I mean, we used to have some pretty good programs in the penitentiary system where people would go and they could actually get some drug treatment. It was very effective. Ben Burgess, who was our U.S. attorney in Kansas for years, was just retired this last January as a judge after 15 or 16 years, says that when his years on the parole board, that our drug treatment program in our Department of Corrections was among the best in the country. But we did away with it because we don't have the money to maintain it. Labette Boot Camp, some of you will remember that. It was a great place. We would send people to Labette to the boot camp, and they come back after 6 months. Low level, usually knucklehead kids doing stupid things, going out and getting in more and more trouble, had an attitude that they didn't want to comply. We'd send them to the boot camp. They'd show back up, standing at attention before the judge. Sir, yes, sir. It changed lives, but it was a $10 million program. They needed money. They just cut the program, lack of funding. Again, what was my point? We have the system we want. It ain't broken. We made it this way. Or we can, instead of continuing to spend that kind of money, we can put money into crisis centers. We can put, and if you don't like that, fine. But we can do something locally to make treatment available to people who need it. We're going to pay one with the other. That's my message. So, I also took the time to put this document together. I've submitted it to every member of the legislature, the county commission, city council, the governor, and anybody else who would like to look at it. And it's just, I have done this for 20 some odd years. I kept my head down, kind of staying in my lane, prosecute my sex crimes and murder cases, which was my job for the longest time. But we've tried to do things towards reform. We've cut our diversion application fee in half. We've expanded it to people even who had felony convictions. And I still have an infinitesimally small number of people even applying for it. So I'm trying, what can I do to enhance, what can I do to do this better? So I took the time to do a very deep dive into the numbers, and that's my effort at identifying what's going wrong in our system and how we can improve it. It is not insurmountable. The one thing else, the final thing I'd point out is, As bad as it may be at 101% capacity, you compare us to other states in our region, we are, other than Nebraska, we have the fewest number of people incarcerated, inmates per 100,000 of Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado. We're far below that. I mean, we're at 322 last year, or 2016, excuse me, using 2016 census numbers. Oklahoma was at 700. 322 for us, 700 for them. I guess my point is it's a bad situation, but it is not so out of hand that we can't fix it. These numbers are striking, but these numbers are manageable. And if we just collectively have the will to decide how we're going to spend our money. I'll make one final, and then it's Jeff's turn to get up here. The thing we cannot continue to do, though, is say we're going to change the laws and do this or that, and the savings we derive from that are going to pay for the reform. That doesn't work. You have to spend the money on the reform first. You have to build it before you can expect any return on investment. Don't invest, you get no return. You don't like the highway between here and Kansas City twisting through the Flint Hills. You wish it was more of a direct shot. That's fine. Build it before you. But if you go and tear up the turnpike now, without having built a new highway, what savings are we going to? I mean, that's a dumb analogy, but you get the point. And we've done that all too often. We're going to quit. We're going to do this differently, and we're going to see savings over time. I'm just telling you, folks, that is not a way to do business. We've done it with Senate Bill 363 a few years ago, or 263. I can't get wound up here and forget my numbers, but it's the juvenile justice bill, and we did all sorts of things and changed it. It's going to take us years to catch up. You got to put the money up front, see the savings, put the reform in place, and then there will be cost savings. That's my 2 cents worth. I said as fast as I could, so I give these guys time.
Good afternoon. Thank you again for allowing us to come up here to speak. One of the things that I did want to start off with is that I'm very concerned in reference to the prison reform and some of the bail reform stuff that has come up in the state legislature. There is, at the beginning of this year, there was some comments made by the governor in the governor's office that our prisons are full of nonviolent criminals and folks that have committed drug crimes. That is a total misnomer. That is not true. And because of some of those statements, now we're starting to see some stuff come through legislatively that is very concerning. So I'm going to give you a brief history of what we're seeing from a mental health aspect, substance abuse aspect, some of the things that we do in the jail or in this community, some other type of information that's related to that, and then some of the fixes that we're trying to talk to legislators about to start easing on this problem. One thing I'll ask you, we've been fighting the war on drugs since the early 80s. Does anybody think we're winning it? We're not. If you think we are, you're way off base. We're not going to win it. We got to change the way we do our system. In 2018, the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office treated 400 inmates in the mental health management pod. The mental health management pod was brought on in 2014. The commissioners at the time voted to give us $750,000 a year to do that, which was very appreciative of, because we've seen a lot of decreases in assaults on our and batteries on our deputies, those type of things. We thought the management system, it holds 49 inmates at a time. We thought once we got them to a point where they're stabilized, those type of things, that they'd go back into general population and we'd be able to circulate people through. That doesn't happen. When they get there, they stay there because they cannot function in general population. In 2018, 30% of the inmates were diagnosed with a mental illness. So that's the other folks that are not in the mental health pod. You have to be very seriously mentally ill to get into the mental health pod. Approximately 1,000 or 73% of inmates have a chemical dependency. Talking about substance abuse, we started doing, with the health department, the Wichita Police Department, ourselves, started really looking at our cases. The type of narcotic cases, opioid cases, marijuana cases, and methamphetamine cases. The entire 90% of our problem here in this city and county is methamphetamine. It is absolutely taken over this city. If any of y'all were here in the 1990s when crack cocaine came here, this is worse because it's a lot more addictive and it's very destructive. What this is showing from Wichita Police Department numbers, you'll see that there's kind of a cross right in the middle of the city. And the darker shades of gray is the more concentration of drug cases that were made by the city of Wichita. The really dark areas They made 1,700 drug cases in those dark areas in 1 year. And then it goes down from there. If you look at the numbers for the sheriff's office, you see we still have kind of that cross through the city of Wichita. But the thing about drugs is it doesn't just stay in the city. We're having major issues in our suburban areas. The Goddards, the Mays, the Park Cities, the Hayesvilles, we're having the same exact issues in those areas. And a lot of drug addicted people, 90% of it is methamphetamine. One thing that we started a couple years ago, we wanted to start actually tracking recidivism here from the Sedgwick County Jail. And to be honest with you, if you look at the numbers, it's not good. And so the way we define it is if the person has been in jail previously and if they return to jail for any reason. 90 days outside of being released from the jail, 30% return. 180 days outside of jail, 42% return. 1 year out of jail, 56% return. And 2 years out of jail, 64% return. So recidivism is a real problem here in Sedgwick County. Again, I talked about the misstatement that was made. I call it's not factual whatsoever. 70% of the Sedgwick County Jail's population is pretrial felonies, meaning that they're in there, a bond has been assessed, and they're in there for a felony type crime. That's 70% of our population. If you come in and get booked for a drug crime, the likelihood of you spending more than 2 hours in our jail is not very likely. Those folks are released on what's called an OR bond, or own recognizance. Because first off, there is so many people being booked on drugs that there's no place for them. So a lot of times, it's this culture of, oh, it's just drugs, let's release them back out. And then the second reason is we're so far behind on the testing aspect of it, it takes almost 6 months to get some of this stuff tested. We can't charge them in custody because you only have 72 hours, they get released back out. The problem is, so do burglars, so do forgers, so do identity thieves. They're not in our jail for very long. And it's because of the way the system has now been set up. Most nonviolent offenders, burglars, identity thieves, forgers are not kept in jail, and they're released on pretrial services. Some bills that were being introduced by the state capitol have some very serious ramifications. One bill would no longer send parole violators to prison, but instead would allow several violations of their parole to be served in 5-day increments in the county jail. I will tell you, I worked at the police department and we formed a group called the TOPS unit, which was an intelligence unit and gang suppression unit in 1997. And that's when we were having a lot of the gang crime, a lot of the homicides, the violent crime, those type of things. It was a very, very productive unit because the parole officers were so inundated with people, they couldn't keep track of them. That's what we did. And we violated people nonstop. They'd go back and do 6 months, 8 months, a year. Through case law that was handed down, it pretty much became non-existent. We disbanded the unit. And now, when you talk to parole officers and some of our probation officers and those type of things, it almost takes an act of God to get these people revoked, to be real honest with you. You might arrest them for a new crime. Okay, the question is, are they convicted of that new crime? Well, no, it hasn't gone through the system. We're not going to revoke them. Multiple times of violating their parole or probation by bad UAs, curfew violations, all this other stuff. Well, these folks were lucky enough when they got convicted that they weren't sent to prison, and they're still not following the rules. Do you think they're not committing crimes? Because they are. But yet, we're doing nothing with them. There's no accountability for them. That's part of our problem. The other part of that bill, when it was introduced, was they would do 160 and 180-day call-ups. It took quite a while for somebody to get there, but when they finally got there, the judge had the ability to sentence them to prison for 160 or 180 days. That bill is saying, nah, let's stick them in the county jail. That's state-convicted prisoners that they want to stick into county jails, which costs you solely as the taxpayer to do, not the state. I understand they're overcrowded, so are we. I mean, today we're 106 inmates out of county, but that's after we built a jail annex that houses 180 prisoners, or we would be up around 300, which is very high for us. Anytime you use the term reform, be very careful using that term. They did mental health reform in the 90s. We had state hospitals in several different areas of the state. Me as a patrol officer, we would take them to St. Joe, they'd be assessed, they'd go off to a mental hospital, and to be honest with you, we never really dealt with them again. But because they came up with mental health reform, which we shouldn't be institutionalized folks forever, which I agree on some aspects of that, they came in with the community, like calm care and community mental health care, which is a great concept if you fund it. It's not funded properly. And so now we're inundated with mental health issues because the system's broke, and broke in two ways. The system's broke because it's not working, and they're literally broke because there's no money given to them. It will take us sometimes 50, 60 days for a mental health patient to actually go to Osawatomie. The problem with Osawatomie is they're acute care only, no long-term care. So they'll go up, the patient will go up there, they'll stuff a bunch of medication down them because they can force it. 10 days later, they're released back to us to take care of. And some of these folks, and I hate to say it, but some folks do not belong out on the streets of the city of Wichita. They belong in an area that can tend to their needs, take care of them, and that's where they need to stay for a very long time. That doesn't exist in Kansas anymore. Also, the push to not incarcerate nonviolent felony crimes. Did you know already that if you don't have a previous record, it takes 3 convictions for burglary to even be looked at to go to prison? Most citizens don't know that. What do you think is one of the biggest crimes people get upset about? Burglary. We do surveys all the time after homicides and stuff. The people down the street, man, that wouldn't have happened to me because I don't live a lifestyle like that, but I'm really pissed off about the burglary that happened to my house because they feel extremely violated. It takes 3 convictions of burglary. They might have done 150 burglaries. Took 3 convictions to even for them to see prison. So to tell me that nonviolent criminals shouldn't be in prison, I don't agree with at all. Because part of the problem is we have been so lenient on property crimes, and with the drug problem that is so bad now, that's why the property crimes are up in this city, in this county, because they have got to get the methamphetamine. So you let them back out, they commit more crimes. I mean, it's plain and simple. So we have got to do something about the substance abuse problem and the mental health problem if we stand a chance on trying to right the ship here in this county. We have to put more money into mental health beds and space. My opinion, and I've talked to some senators and representatives about it, I truly believe we need to build a big treatment facility that's ran by the state. Judges right now for drug crimes and for property crimes that most have a drug habit cannot sentence them to prison, depending on the grid, depending on how many convictions they have. So they let them right back out. My opinion is we give the judges the latitude that it was somebody comes in because they always want to blame their substance abuse problem for why they committed the crime, so they always admit to it. Well, while they're blaming their substance abuse problem, not a problem. I can't put you in prison, but I'm sentencing you to 6 months to a year in a treatment facility. Plain and simple. Now, it's going to cost us some money to do that. But what's the return investment? The return investment is, in my opinion, that we'll have less people committing crimes when they get out, and we're spending less money on the criminal justice system because, folks, it's very expensive. It costs me $75,000 a day to open the doors of that jail. And that doesn't include all the other stuff. We spend $6.5 million a year in medical costs. We spend a lot of money just here in Sedgwick County, let alone the entire state. One of the other things that we have discussed very robustly the last 2 years, there is a group of us from ComCare, the DA's office, Crime Commission, Via Christi, all the people that are providing substance abuse and mental health care here locally. We're forming a group that's going to have a committee, 501c3, of folks that from the police department, sheriff's office, different folks from law enforcement plus mental health and substance abuse. We're forming 2 committees, one to deal with substance abuse, one to deal with mental health care. And our push is we do regionalization of mental health care in the state of Kansas. That means we build a regional state mental hospital here in Wichita, because we fill up Osawatomie about 50% of their people. We need to have one of those there here, and then outlying posts in western Kansas, southeast Kansas that would funnel into us, because every county's dealing with this. It's just a different, they might have 5 or 6 that they can't handle. We got hundreds. And so we have got to start investing money in substance abuse and mental health care if we're going to stem this tide. I truly believe in holding people accountable for the crimes that they commit. Okay? I don't look at this as a soft way to look at crime. What's being proposed is a very soft way to look at crime. Let them back out. That's not going to work, folks. One of the things that I'll leave you with as well is I understand the state is in a predicament. And if anybody's school teachers here and stuff, hey, I got family that's school teachers. But when the state has to spend 74% of their budget for public school education, everything else the state has to do only gets 26%. One of the reasons we're in this predicament, and it's been this way for a while. And so, again, we are looking forward to the future. We are starting to look at different ways to stem this tide. We're hoping, and we know the legislation is listening to us on the mental health stuff and substance abuse stuff. There's just not enough money to put into it just yet. But we're hoping to come up with a 5 to 10 year plan with this group, because we're building a strategic plan to start addressing all these issues locally, because we cannot depend on the state to take care of this, because they can't and they won't. And so we have got to look within ourselves here what we can do to start driving some of our crime rates down, to start reducing our numbers in jail, but not because we're just letting them out, because we're doing something that is positive in hopes that these people turn their lives around and become positive members of our community and not negative. So thank you very much.
See if I can click this thing here. Wrong way, there we go. There we go. First of all, let me just say, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a judge, I'm certainly not a law enforcement officer, so these guys are experts on the law, and I know they're doing a great job for Sedgwick County. I'd like to just say thank you to them and their service to the county. As they've already stated, this is a very complex problem. The reason I'm up here, frankly, is not because I'm an expert, because I'm certainly not. I got interested in this topic when Judge Riddell Boys Ranch was in the news back in 2012. And you might remember back then, there was a study that said that Judge Riddell Boys Ranch was reducing recidivism and keeping kids out of prison and out of adult prison. It was a very effective program. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. It was also expensive, but the study said we're actually saving taxpayer dollars. And so from a conservative Republican perspective, it was actually a smart program. It's called smart government, in my opinion. And that became a community talking point. I think that the community generally thought Judge Riddell Boys Ranch was a really good organization, and I really believe it was. It is no longer there for a couple of reasons. I'd like to just quickly give you a little bit of history, but before I even do that, let me just tell you, all three of us and others from the community are on an organization called the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And the smartest people, like these folks, not so much me, but we have judges who sit on that council as well, and it is as regional experts, if you will, come together, trying to find ways to be smart with how we handle the issues of criminal justice in Sedgwick County. So they're doing a good job. They've actually made a significant difference in the years that they've been active, and I'm very appreciative of that. There's a lot of good ideas out there, and there's new ideas coming up all the time. Back to Judge Riddell Boys Ranch, let me just say, that was a program that was initially started by Sedgwick County. It wasn't a state program at all. It was solely funded by the county, and they developed, if you will, ways to program and help these kids get on a better path. It became focused primarily on criminogenic boys and girls, not what we call SINK kids. SINK kids, or children in need of care, are managed in different types of homes around the county, but these criminogenic kids have committed serious crimes. They're considered medium to high risk youth, and they were being treated out there at Judge Riddell Boys Ranch. We had 50 beds out there, and they would do all kinds of chores. It was very regimented. It was a great place for some of our youth to go out there and realign their thinking. They needed 6 months to do that. Well, what happened was the county decided that this was no longer something they wanted to invest in. It was costing the county about $1 million a year. But it was saving more than that in terms of the effects of having an effective program. And that's a really important word, by the way. The word effective is extremely important. The things that work, the things that create efficiencies, those are the things we need to fund, however we have to do that. And that's a decision we have got to make going forward here. But nevertheless, the state started listening to really a national trend. NCSL and CSG, if you know those organizations, started advocating for community-based programs. And that's not bad. Community-based programs work in many cases. They don't work for all kids. They do work for many of our youth. And so the state began to take money out of juvenile corrections across our state and start supporting community-based programs instead. So there's been a shifting of dollars from one way we handle this problem to a new way to handle this problem. And it has been somewhat effective for those programs, but there still leaves some kids out there that are really not getting effective treatment. And right now there are 0 beds in the state of Kansas for boys or girls for criminogenic youth that need to have a residential program unless they go to kiddie prison or juvenile detention facilities. And so we have completely defunded that in lieu of these community-based programs. Sedgwick County used to have a thing called Sedgwick County Youth Program, SCYP, or we call it SKIP for short. The state also wanted to defund that, and so we closed that down as well. We created a program over at the Harry Street Mall called the Judge Riddell Boys and Girls Alternative Program. It's including the girls now, which was, I think, very important because there's a population out there that wasn't really getting any help. And so we're doing that now through our community-based programs. We also have what's called evening reporting programs. And we have kids over there, if you don't know this is going on, Monday through Friday, several hours every single evening. That place fills up with young people who are struggling with life. We have some great staff from Sedgwick County that are interfacing these kids. Some of the kids are even from out of county coming in for services here. And we're working with them, trying to get them realigned in their thinking, encourage them to be successful and not to re-enter the criminal system in any way, but moving more to a productive way of life. I would like to just reflect on the fact that the SKIP program opened up a building, so we repurposed. We sent the work release facility that used to be at Harry and McLean and moved it over to the old SKIP building at Central by the railroad tracks, just east of the courthouse. And that building was more aligned to the size we needed there. And we have great staff over there that have developed and are continuing to develop programs that helps some of our inmates get out of the jail, that starts transitioning back into the private life, helps them with getting ID cards, helping them with resume writing, helping them with interview skills, helping with practical job skills, and helping them find jobs. And they can actually go to work and begin to earn money. And some of that money goes to pay for their laundry and their haircuts and their clothes and some of the things that they are, the restitution perhaps. And so these are people who are being transitioned back into the private life. And that program works very well. I'm extremely impressed with our adult corrections that's running that program. If you've not seen it and you'd like to see it, let us know. But I got to visit that with a few people in this room several months ago, and I'll just tell you, it was extremely impressive. They do a really, really good job. And I would like to just commend our staff for that. But the old building, the old work release building at Harry and McLean, we repurposed that. It cost us a couple $1 million, I guess, not quite, maybe $1.5 million or so, to repurpose that building to what we call a jail annex. You may not realize this, but we have so many people in the Sedgwick County jail system that we're sending about 300 of them out of county, and we've been doing this for years, and the numbers continue to grow a little bit each year. But this new facility, has been repurposed. In the very first year, we expect we're going to save over $2 million because we're operating a little more efficiently by not sending these inmates out of county. Some of these inmates are as many as 4 hours away. Requires staff to transport them back and forth, depreciation on vehicles, gasoline, you name it. There's a lot of expenses to managing that population and taking them back and forth. Some of these guys have to go through court systems and they have to have mandatory appointments here in town. So just the enormous expense, plus we pay those jail houses across the state per daily rate, if you will, to house our prisoners. And so this was just really not the best system. We still have about 120 right now that are basically being out of county placements, but now they're closer. They're about an hour away rather than 4 hours away. And so we have about 180 of our inmates now are at this facility. I got to tour that this last week. Lonnie, you were with me. I was very impressed. They're doing a tremendous job. I'm so happy that someone came up with a good idea to keep our prisoners closer to home, closer to the court system, reducing costs, and that $2 million is now, guess where? I think it's available to be reinvested back into other ways to help solve some of these problems. I can tell you our costs are not going down. And by the way, these two men did a great job already. I will just tell you that mental health is absolutely mental health and substance abuse are the biggest problems. Everything we're doing to spend money on it. I mean, you look at that thing, the next slide here. We're spending a ton of money on the system altogether. It's not any one problem. It's mental health, it's substance abuse, it's the courts, it's the judicial system, it's our 911, all the law enforcement officers. Sedgwick County spends about $153 million, and that's not counting the fire district, of course. This is just things that are tied into the things we've been talking about today, about $150 million. And that's up about 17% just since I've been a commissioner. So we're continuing to add more money to this part of the budget. About 40% of all of our budget goes into the issue of these things here. About 40% of our budget is tied into public safety stuff like these things here. We do get lots of grant funds. We try to get all we can. Honestly, I don't trust the state. May I say that? No offense to anybody who's from the state here. But the state doesn't have a lot of money, and I don't think that they're going to have a lot of money. And if we sit here and wait for a long time, we might wait forever, and they may never solve this problem. Let me just tell you, that I was not able to find the data today, but I believe that Wichita and Sedgwick County is an exporter of your tax dollars. We send out more money than we get back. So I'm not sure I want the state to solve this problem. If they would take the money and give it back, fine, we can talk about that. We want to use that money and begin to solve this problem. Just like Judge Riddell Boys Ranch, we spend $1 million local dollars to help that problem. May I suggest this is our problem? We need to solve it sooner than later. I'd like to ask the state to do their part. I'd like to ask the state to help us to the extent some of our tax dollars are encumbered by the state. We want to get those dollars back, absolutely. I'm a huge advocate for that. But I'm not willing to wait either. We have got to begin to solve these problems. By the way, on our legislative platform for Sedgwick County, we do have on there mental health, regional hospital stuff. We would like to have the mental health addressed as closely as possible. But Osawatomie and Larned are not revered as great institutions. They have lots of problems. And so even if we were to get this mental health hospital here, I don't know how great it will be, because those grant dollars come in with the encumbrances. They tell you exactly how you have to run the program. One of the problems I see in the state is they've stripped us of our local control. We have great ideas here locally, but when we receive someone else's dollars, they get to decide the program for us. And there's things in law we cannot do because they don't give us the authority to do them. So I think that's legislative solutions, in my opinion. Is advocate for those dollars, give us more local control, give us some freedom to be smart with those dollars. But at the end of the day, this is our problem. And if we have to use our own county dollars to begin to unwind this thing here locally, I'm a fan of that, okay? It's what we need to do. I'm just about out of time here. I'm just going to say I appreciate these guys. I would say there is a lot of misinformation out there. It is frustrating. I do think that programs that work, anything that provides real solutions that saves taxpayer dollars, as a conservative Republican, we should get behind those ideas. And I think I've ran out of my time, so I'll stop. Thank you.
So thank you all for sharing with us. And we've talked about people after they get into the system. What can we do on the front end, maybe, to keep them from getting the system? I went to a lecture by Condoleezza Rice, and she talked about all the problems we had. And I said, what's the answer? She said education, and there may be more than that. But what do you all see? Is there something we can do on the front end instead of fixing it on the back end?
I don't think that the problems on the back end are, let's put it this way, I don't think we can compartmentalize them. The problems are the problems. So to give you an example of the cases we file in Sedgwick County, I did a spot check. Jeff and I have been out front very much on the issue of drugs, and had a big drug summit out at Hughes Metroplex last fall, and we talked about this ad nauseum. One of the things I was trying to see is, methamphetamine to me is something that I see it so often in so many major cases, and I'm not going to comment. We had a terrible situation overnight. that I was getting briefed on before I came here. And, you know, my gut instinct on all these is methamphetamine is driving these crimes. But no, well, let's not use my gut. Let's use raw numbers. Let's get into this. And so we did a spot check and found that 11% of the cases I have filed on this given day, that there was at least one count of methamphetamine in the charging document. So what that means is whether you're charged with forgery or burglary or car theft or murder, did we also charge at least one count of methamphetamine? 11%. Meaning they still had product in their pocket when they got picked up for whatever else they were doing. Okay? Well, maybe that's just a bad day. So we did spot checks across several years, the last 3 years. It was between 11 and 13% of my cases every single time. So my answer, if it seems like I'm beating the same drum, is I agree with Condoleezza Rice in terms of education. I mean, I'm not standing here if I don't have a college degree and a law degree. I mean, that, you know, but the thing that seems to be derailing people's lives is drugs. If I had one thing, I mean, yes, mental health, I mean, but so many people have mental health issues that live productive lives. I'm not in any way suggesting there's a one-to-one corollary between people with mental health issues and somehow making them be a crime driver. I'm just saying there's too many people with mental health issues in the system, and it makes it very difficult for them to comply and you know, with probation, et cetera. But if there was one thing I could do, I think it's back to the same thing we talked about, which is access to drug treatment. If we had better access to drug treatment on the front end of things before I ever got into trouble, maybe my folks could get me into treatment. Maybe I could get myself into treatment. Where do you go for treatment? And by the way, just one parenthetical, where do you go if your child you got a 15 or 16-year-old who's suicidal and they need more than a night in the hospital? They need 5 or 7 days of treatment. Where do you go in Sedgwick County? Anybody know? Hayes or Kansas City. I'm not kidding. And we're trying, KBC is trying to put a mental health hospital for juveniles, a children's mental health hospital in at 21st and Mays, or 21st and Meridian, just east of the old Twin Lakes. But right now, tonight, you got a 16-year-old child who's in dire straits. They are mentally ill. They have a mental break. You got to drive them to Kansas City. So that's just another little parenthetical there. But I don't think that the issues in the system are all that different than the ones before they get into the system.
Just real quick on that, prevention and education is a huge piece of it. We got to start when they're young. The second thing is, and I don't know how we solve this, parents taking personal responsibility for their kids. If they are not engaged with their kids, and that's where we see most of the problems, it's the teacher's fault, it's the cop's fault, it's everything else. That's where we see the breakdown, and I don't know how you spend money or correct that problem.
Okay, the problem that you said is recidivism, people coming back. We've got a revolving door system. We're just wasting our resources on the same people. So let's give them all a 20-year sentence and they have to prove they've been reformed before they get out.
You know, that's the other way you could go. I can't imagine the amount of prisons we'd be building, the amount of money that would cost. I'm not sure that would be less, because the problem is that, trust me, I'm all about accountability and holding. And when I was a beat cop, hey, they can all go to jail and rot. Don't ever want to see them again. The problem is they don't go to jail and they don't rot. They're back out and they're committing more crimes and those type of things. And I just don't think here in Kansas we're at a point where, well, anywhere in the United States, because of all the reform stuff that they're talking about, is sending people to jail for 20 years. You know, folks have tried the 3 strikes and out. Well, that's been struck in different places. So there's been other things that have been tried, but we've never tried to solve the initial problem, which is the substance abuse and the mental health stuff. And that's why I'm supporting that angle.
And I would just add that as much as it would feel good to send somebody up and in the moment say, now that'll learn you, think about all the other cascading collateral problems. So that guy's doing 20 years for the theft. What about his kids? All the taxes he's not paying. I mean, there are other consequences here for do that approach. And while I understand the frustration, I think we got to do better than that.
Don't forget, they can shorten their sentence if they prove they've changed.
And I think that's one of the things Jeff's talking about. One of the things we could do is say, you know, for drug offenders, instead of having a grid, we could say you got a 3-year sentence. We send it to an actual treatment facility, and if you do well in it, we cut your sentence, give you 50% good time, and get you back out. I mean, maybe we're closer than your first statement led me to believe. I don't disagree with that. Let them, but we also then got to put money into the system to give them something that they can be successful at. Not, if you sit in a cage for the next 6 months and not do anything wrong, I'll let you out. I think they're not any better when they get back out. So if we're going to do that, I got no problem with that as long as we're giving them a system that they can actually improve themselves. So.
As a legislator, I know the rest of the folks here feel the same way. We greatly appreciate your frankness today, all three of you. We don't get help by platitudes and latitudes. We need to be serving the community in a way that we're actually making a difference. Wanted to ask you a direct question about what do you believe as far as mental health and mental illnesses that contribute to jail population and to the courts being full. How much of that is diagnosed and how much it's diagnosed after it's in the system?
Some of it's diagnosed after they get in the system. Some of it, you know, if they've got parents, they got a support system. When the kid starts to go off the rails, you know, late teenage years is the early onset of schizophrenia primarily. Being schizophrenic does not mean you're criminal, but being schizophrenic and undiagnosed and then maybe self-medicating and hide, you know, it can lead to a lot of aberrant behavior, a lot of criminal behavior. And so you get 19 years of age and no one quite knows what's going on. You get in trouble. You go out and you do something bad. You get into a fist fight in a bar and you hurt somebody. All of a sudden now you're going to be booked on that aggravated battery. You've got a felony arrest. That is a moment in time that you don't get back. That's a moment in time that is going to change the course of your life. Now, maybe it doesn't derail your life entirely, but that's hard to overcome. It would be better if we could have diagnosed him earlier. But as Jeff said, you got to have a support system. You got to have parents who are there and invested. I got a D when I was in 8th grade on English, and I thought my world was going to come down. When I got a D the second semester, it did fall down. I think my teacher was more scared of my dad than I was, because he walked in and said, "Here's by God what's going to happen," and you know, I didn't have the chance. I had lots of chances to screw up, and I took full advantage of it. But I had somebody on the backside of me, extricating their foot from my backside about twice a month to make sure I ended up where I am today. You know, I'm not in big on platitudes. I'm going to be very frank here, but yes, we need access so that if the school sees a problem, they can get the kid. Maybe the school's where the problem is diagnosed, but we've got to have. I mean, it's a parent's responsibility. I agree, but we got a whole lot of folks who ain't living up to that.
One other thing that I'd add to that is just a real quick example. When we spoke to the legislators this last year, we had several people that we could pick from, but we had one person that had booked into the Sedgwick County Jail 17 times in 1 month. During that time, had been to ComCare about 15, 16 times, to St. Joe 13 or 14 times, and was pre-diagnosed. But it was such low-level felonies or misdemeanors that were released right back out. And so you take that one person, how much money did we spend already on this one person that 1 month? That's why we have to have a change in the system, in my opinion.
Last question.
Teresa Brown Foster. What you need is a citizens advisory board for reentry. If you don't have the community, sell the community in on what you're doing, if you're just doing it yourself and looking at government or whatever, you're not going to get anywhere. I already know that from serving on the reentry board with Marilyn Cook when she was over here. Do you need another facility? Yes, you do. And how? You just don't know how many people are out there that are mentally ill. Absolutely. Jim, you hit it right on the nail. The state control, no. We need to control that locally here in Sedgwick County. Now, let me tell you one thing that you don't know, and it's just a stigma out there. The juvenile suicidal rate for African American children is 3 times, and that's right here in Sedgwick County, than it is for whites or even the whites. 3 times more. Oh, okay, thank you. My husband was telling me to hurry up. I get so excited. But you need the community. You got to have a reentry program with the community. Now, I want to know what you all think about that, because it kind of worked, Jeff, you know, when we did have the reentry program with the citizens and the businesses included in that.
There's an umbrella of supervision, whether it's pre-crime, post-arrest, post-conviction, post-incarceration. At any point, resources can't just be plugged into one area and expect that we're going to have improvement. Reentry, that term she's using, reentry, what she's referring to is people coming back to the community after incarceration. They're called reentry programs. You want to get a guy to be successful when he gets back. What's the point of incarceration? A changed behavior. When he comes back, I'm going to knock it off. You learned your lesson now. Go back, get a job, quit doing that. But if you bring him back, I get letters. I used to get letters. I won't say this anymore. I'll give Mr. Wereholtz a credit. I don't get these anymore, but I was getting letters 2 years ago. They always have to notify me when someone's released from the penitentiary, and they were released to the address. And the address they were being released to is Greyhound Bus Station. You laugh. That's true. I was getting letters from DOC saying the guy is released to the Greyhound Bus Station. I'm like, well, that'll work. So, yeah, we need reentry.
Thank you, one and all. Have a great weekend. We're adjourned.